Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. The Fight for Reparations reminds me of an old saying that came from the world of lobbying. If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. There is a part that everyone can play in this fight, and don't sell yourself short. A number of you have heard about reparations forums either in your state or even in your city where you live, and you've made it a point to get involved and speak up for us all. Even if you happen to be the only one there for one of these events, what matters is making sure that our demands are heard, that someone says the words. Because if we're not talking, the enemy will be. People like our sister Eve have made it a point to actually go to these kind of events instead of waiting and sitting back and seeing if somebody else is going to go. If you hear about it, you be the one to go. Everybody has a part to play. Now, that said, we also have to be very circumspect about who we allow to call themselves speaking for us, especially on issues like reparations. What I mean is, when it comes to these little panels they put together, they got them front loaded with a whole bunch of bootlicks, even the ones who pretend not to be. When the Jews talk about reparations, they make sure the only people speaking are those who are saying that the Holocaust requires cash payment. And they don't allow you to say anything else. They don't allow anyone to come along and say, well, some of the Jews were in the Judenrat and they were helping the Nazis, so it's not all Hitler's fault, you know. The Jews would never allow anyone to say that. Why do we? Do not ever let anyone say, but what about the Africans? Negroes who talk like that are basically white supremacists among us. And we all know some of the worst white supremacists aren't even classified as white. Sadly, we have a lot of black people who toe the line for the enemy and will make it a point to position and insinuate themselves into places where they shouldn't be. And white power, knowing these are loyal bootlicks, will go ahead and help to put them there. Many of them are looking for a pat on the head or interracial sexual access or whatever, but the point is they're not looking for black empowerment. See, well before we reinvigorated the entire movement for reparations, the white media had been spending decades trying to lay the groundwork for undermining any sort of reparations claim. And one of their main talking points is, well, didn't the Africans have something to do with it? See, they make movies like The Woman King precisely to push the propaganda that the slave trade was all the Africans' idea. And the Europeans didn't really want to do it. Why? They're not even in the picture. Why, those mean old Africans, they forced the Europeans to take black people as slaves. The white media makes sure that they include some of that stuff. They've been having people who every once in a while would spout some gibberish like that. This is an attempt to rewrite the history books, because the entire reason for slavery was to get rich at our expense, to get something for nothing. And the people who benefited from all of our uncompensated labor are the very ones who today are claiming that they work so hard and they're never looking for a handout and, well, black people need to be self-reliant, coming from the people who have relied on us for every crumb of their daily bread. But the former slaves refused to die, and we're demanding all that back pay we're owed with interest. So now the enemy has a catastrophic political problem on their hands. The racial order they put in place was based entirely on systematically depriving us of resources. And if that balance of resource deprivation changes, then the racial hierarchy changes as well. We have to start making it a point to vet these people who call themselves being on these reparations task forces. If somebody has ever formed their mouth to push the propaganda that the Africans were responsible for the slave trade, that's somebody who you can't allow to be on any sort of panel. They shouldn't be talking at all. Even if we lived in opposite land, where up is down and down is up, and where the white slave owners were merely victims of circumstance, you still couldn't make any phony straw men about Africans being behind the slave trade, because the kingdoms and the tribal fiefdoms that existed then were erased when the Europeans colonized all those places. If the Europeans were merely victims of circumstance, then why was it that they bums rushed Africa at the point of a gun and slaughtered millions of people there so they could take over their land and their resources? No matter what some handkerchief head may try to tell you, there would have been no slave trade without the Europeans. And there would have been no American slavery without this racist white supremacist government and its industries that demanded it. They fought a civil war to maintain and perpetuate slavery. Was that because the Africans wouldn't let it end? When do these white supremacists start taking responsibility for their own behavior? And we have traitors among us, Negroes who want to be accepted by these white supremacists and will undermine and try to tear down our efforts, because a lot of these Negroes you see, including a number of them online, have made common cause with these white supremacists who are denying us what we are owed. In many cases, they're literally sleeping with the enemy. Be on alert. Anytime you see some Negro talking about Africans sold to other Africans, that's an agent you're listening to. He may try to dress himself up as being some sort of iconoclastic free thinker, or I'm just open-minded. Yeah, real open-minded that his brain, well, what passes for his brain slipped out of his head a long time ago. I don't care how much you may agree with what they say, or they may come off as witty, or somebody wants to come off as rather clever. When somebody starts to talk about reparations, the only thing I better hear is how much we're owed. Period. Put the blame where it belongs, on these white supremacists, and then let them know the rent is due with interest. Too many Negroes are two-faced, and they've been allowed to get away with it. They want to have one foot in black empowerment, at least a couple of toes, only when it suits them. Then they want to have the other foot and at least one hand in the kumbaya, swirler, gender war, class struggle. Racism doesn't exist except when these white supremacists have their foot up my behind. Oh, and I'm holding out for a Democratic Party political consulting gig. We got too many Negroes who want to pretend as if they're talking about black people's interests, when in reality they got an agenda that only includes themselves. We got far too many Negroes out here who are trying to be a constituency of one. We had to call out Ice Cube because he had been talking about a black Bill of Rights and programs for black people from the Biden administration. A lot of folks were saying that he was on the side of the angels, but I didn't, because I know these black celebrities, and I've learned over many years of bitter experience that they see themselves on the inside looking out. That's how they look at themselves. We're on the inside looking out. So they're not going to risk that little old paycheck that they get from these white media companies. Jada Pinkett was upset about the Oscars being all white, but that was just a scam. She was only complaining about the fact that she wasn't going to be getting an Oscar. Dave Chappelle does a lot of jokes that seem to be speaking up for black people, at least some of the time. And on some facile level, that might be true, but he also keeps some questionable company. And he stuck up for the right of racist so-called comedians to take shots at black people, and he chose to live in a majority white area, a red state area, mind you. When they were discussing building affordable housing near where he was living at, he was at the city council personally to protest it and insult and degrade the city council for even considering such an idea. I've said it a million times and will continue to say it. Whenever you see these black comedians and celebrities and actors and such and politicians talking about black or about blackness, they're actually only talking about themselves. They're speaking strictly from a personal point of view. Sure, they may reference some black people here or there, or refer to a black person who had been harmed or killed, but in reality, when they do that, they're just venting their own neuroses and phobias that they could wind up being next. That's what they're really saying. I don't want to be next. That's all it is. And I'm sorry for those of you who are very easily swayed by words, but I'm not. I look at the person's track record. That's why when it comes to these victims of white supremacist violence, be it at the hands of the police or non-uniformed racists, I don't put on the cape. I wait and see if they stand for themselves and whether they commit to that position. So let's be on our guard, family. We cannot allow tethers or intersectionalists or any of these other subgroups who work against black empowerment to speak on reparations. Let's make sure we're not allowing any other two-faced individuals to do so. Because in every single case, when you look at these so-called reparations task forces or study groups, in every single case, if you ask who the members of these groups are going to be and whether or not they themselves support reparations, if you ask them, they'll say, yeah, I support reparations. But then the moment you turn your back, they're saying, no cash reparations, and what about the Africans? Earlier this year, we had that situation with the San Francisco NAACP. They had some civil rights fossil preacher man who was also a pastor for Kamala Harris when she was out there, and he was leading the charge to say no cash reparations and how cash reparations would be counterproductive and be a bad thing. This is supposed to be a doggone black preacher. If anybody knows about getting cash, it should be him. It was only after the black grassroots called him out that he pretended to walk that back, but it was only weasel words. It's the oldest trick in the book. How do you guarantee you win a war? By making sure you control both sides. They have these bits of political theater they like to put on for our benefit, like that sham congressional hearing on reparations a couple of years back, where they pretended that one side is pro-reparations and the other side is against it. But when you listen to the so-called pro-reparations side, they say no cash reparations. And the only thing they want are feelings and apologies and talk. In other words, nothing. But because most black people are willing to settle for nothing and have done so for so long, they don't even recognize the scam or don't realize that they shouldn't be tolerating it. Any black person who is not B1 is for black last, because that's currently where we are. Too many Negroes are looking for an escape from blackness. And like black folks have done with religion, these people try to find a way to make their cowardice sound virtuous. They're standing on some sort of principle, when in reality, they're just running scared. Too many black people want to have it both ways, and that won't work. They know that what they're doing is more or less lacking in character, but they got to try to make it seem like it's not that way. The real problem is that when you're used to taking L's all day after day, you start to give up on getting a win. You sabotage yourself. You look for the easy way out. You tell yourself, well, whatever we were doing, it was never going to work anyway. I think it was Booker T. Washington who said that white power isn't afraid of black failure because that reassures them they're still in charge. What white power is scared of is black success, because that's a challenge and a threat. Far too many black people operate the same way. A lot of black people actually take comfort in our being repressed because they think that us not being competitive means that we're not going to be threatening to other groups, when in reality, being downtrodden makes you nothing more than an easy target. A lot of us are actually scared of black empowerment, no matter how much people may pay lip service to it. Black people being poor is familiar to us. We know it because we've suffered it for so long. But what about when black people are calling the shots? We're not used to that because it's been so long since we've been in that position. Having power means no time for goofing off. It means a lot less time to chill, and secretly a lot of black people are terrified of that. This is why we have a number of Negroes who want to be defeatists. It's easy to cheerlead against your own team when you're scared of the responsibility and the expectations that go along with winning. Power also means being unpopular with other people who are used to you being on your knees. How many of you would actually be apologizing to your non-black co-workers and friends and associates and colleagues if you got reparations? If you're chasing a pat on the head for the dominant society because you think they're going to give you a leg up, or if you're hoping for some interracial sexual access and you don't want to mess that up, well, when you're getting something that they're not, I guess that might make it a little awkward, wouldn't it? When your non-black friends start trying to say that they should get a check because if you got one, they deserve one too, just because, how many of you would call them out on it? See, when everyone else gets a check, or everybody else gets land, or everybody else gets benefits or handouts or anything else, black people are the ones who walk away empty-handed and we're told to be quiet because we weren't owed anything to begin with. So why do you feel the need to spare someone else's feelings when it's their turn to see you getting what you're owed? You actually earned it. That's the difference between you and them. We suffer from a number of dysfunctions, but one of the worst is we lack perseverance. We want instant gratification. We've been conditioned to be that way. And if things don't happen in 5 minutes or less, to a lot of us, that's our opportunity to bail because we really didn't want to be there in the first place. So let's renew our dedication to the cause. Be on the lookout for agents who white supremacy puts among us to undermine our agenda, and be brutally honest with yourself about whether you've truly been looking for empowerment or for a chance to go back to goofing off full time. Those Negroes who have a problem with us being black first will have to learn to live with being angry. Those Negroes who have an agenda other than us being in the driver's seat, they're just going to have to get used to the fact that none of us are as weak as they are. We are truly proud of who and what we are, and that makes these watered-down, weak Negroes insecure. And what makes them so insecure is that they understand that when they're talking about blackness, it's just empty boasting. It's just empty braggadocio. They don't even know what the hell they're talking about. When they say blackness, all they're referring to is having a requisite amount of melanin. But what they hate about us is that when we say blackness, we mean melanin and a state of mind. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Suleiman Alaji, Black Voltron Reloaded, Rose Arnold, G95, and Morris Bodden. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.